What does it mean when it says that greater love has no man or person than to lay down his life for his friends? What does that mean? Are we laying down our lives for our friends, for one another? Greater love has no man than he laid down his life for his friends. I want us to pretend that we're back in Roman times in Athens, Greece, listening to a sermon by Paul, who said that the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all men life and breath and everything. And he made from one nation of men to live on all the face of the earth. It says in Greek, one blood. Right there disarms racism. We're all of one blood. That they should seek God in the hope that they might feel after him and find him, though he is not far from every one of us. For we live and breathe and have our being in him. For we are his offspring. So if we are the offspring of God, should not think that he is like gold or silver or stone. The times of ignorance God overlooked in the past, but now he commands men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man that he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to everyone by raising him from the dead. What does that have to do with counterterrorism and politics? It's embedded in this document right here, the Declaration of Independence. Basically, in everyday language, we're not allowed to schlep our way through life. We're supposed to be engaged in the world and the affairs around us. We're not authorized to be ignorant of the times that we live in. And the reason that we are given the Holy Spirit as Spirit-filled believers is so that we can discern what are the three qualities of the Spirit of God. To lead us and guide us into all truth. To bring to remembrance everything that he's ever taught us, and to show us things to come. If he's intending for us to know about things to come, what is the reason for that? It's so that we can prepare, is it not? When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station, to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them, that disarms diversity doctrine, at least in the terms of the way the left presents it, that's actually the opposite. Though we say we're diverse, we're actually becoming more and more the same. There's differences in administration and diversity of operations among the people of the world and in the creation itself. The Declaration of Independence recognizes that because nature teaches it so. The laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of men requires them that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. In other words, we are mandated by the Declaration of Independence to be involved in the affairs of the government and the culture that we live in, not to be ignorant of the times that we live in. We are supposed to redeem the times because they are what? Evil. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Who institutes government? God, the creator of the universe, the one that provides us with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In order to secure these rights, institutes government. That's what the book of Romans talks about. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Is this administration governing by the consent of the government? Of the governed, I should say? Are the people in Rutland, Vermont, being advised on the policy of the U.S. government to bring in refugees with no involvement of the community whatsoever, or maybe Grand Rapids, Minnesota, or Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or any other number of a dozen places across the country where the so-called noble goals of rescuing refugees from threat and harm is so noble that the government doesn't feel they have any right or responsibility to tell any of us what they're actually doing. We don't know the criteria of the United Nations in vetting these individuals, and they will not tell us. We don't know the criteria of the State Department in granting them visas, and they will not tell us. By the time we encounter them here, we have no clue who they are. Is that being governed by the consent? No. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. And to institute new government, laying its foundation on what? Such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. We also know from the Declaration that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. That's where we are right now. Anybody know the word Dainu from the Passover? It means enough in Hebrew. It's a core understanding, a core principle of the Passover ceremony, aka Easter. Passover is the deliverance from slavery. And when enough was finally enough, the Lord delivered the children of Israel from slavery. When enough was finally enough in the Soviet Union, the wall came down. When enough is finally enough, the people, though they don't take it lightly and are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, abolish the forms to which they are accustomed. It's basically saying don't take it lightly. But I call it stretching the rubber band. There comes a time when you must intervene because you are required by the Creator of the universe to be involved in the government. This really is a government of, for, and by the people. And if you were an atheist and you were a valiant defender of the Constitution, and I was an evangelical, also a valiant defender of the Constitution, I could be an ally with you on that basis. Why? I won't argue theology with you right now. The very simple fact that you're standing on a Constitution makes me an ally with you, because whether you say you believe in God or not, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are saturated with biblical values. So why would I argue with you what your theology is when you're already a natural ally with me? And that was the big mistake the body of Christ made in the last election, arguing about whether Romney was a Mormon or not and whether we should vote for him. Because it wasn't about what his Mormonism is about, who was more likely to stand up for the principles of the Constitution. And with the benefit of hindsight, who do you suppose at this point in history, looking back, would have been more likely to have stood on the principles of the Constitution? The current president or Romney? It seems obvious now. God winked at this ignorance in times past, and don't imply, I'm not implying, I'm just quoting the verse. We're not allowed to go through life in a state of ignorance. We have been equipped with the capacity to see into the future. For what purpose? To prepare ourselves and our family and our neighbors and everybody that lives around us for a possible confrontation between the God of this world, who hates everything that is of truth and light, and the Creator of the universe. Where do we stand? Why is so much of the Bible talking about spiritual warfare? Why is there so much emphasis on the armor of God? Because you cannot survive this battle without the armor of God. Remember Iron Man when he takes point-blank tank rounds? I love that. I just love it. That's us. If Paul was alive today, preaching to the body of Christ today, he'd be talking about spiritual warfare and the armor of God. Do you realize that in the Roman times, the most high-tech equipment that was made by hands was the armor of a soldier? Why? Because it was fitted to him precisely. Because if it wasn't fitted, there'd be a gap and you would die, as some projectile would go underneath your armor. Every single individual was carefully measured, and the equipment that he wore was high-tech for the time. If we had our spiritual armor on today as described, and the Bible was be written now, we would have night vision goggles and Kevlar vests and shoulder-mounted RPGs and laser-guided bombs and all this stuff that we use, because it's all just an illustration. The Lord's power is above and beyond anything that we can imagine, so the Bible uses allegory to help us connect and understand what he intends us to do. What are we called for? Why are we Spirit-filled believers? To luxuriate in the blessings of the covenant, or to engage in the battle? There's a beautiful allegory. My wife and I discovered this, me by her prompting. The word for salvation in Greek is soterios. The word for a person who brings salvation is soterion, and it also means a healing warrior. Are we healing warriors? We intrude without permission into the battlefield of the adversary. After all, he said, "Unto me have been given all the kingdoms of the world, and I give them to whomever I will." Right? If you'll simply bow down and worship me, I will give it to you. He doesn't mention, but I can take it back anytime I want to. And that, my friends, is what we're being asked to do right now, to bow down to the God of this world, to compromise our beliefs and what we stand for, and submit Islam to the doctrines of this world. There are only two unforgivable sins in the Bible. Can someone name one of them? Blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. And what's the other one? There is two. Taking of the mark. It's the irredeemable. But by the way, Hillary Clinton, that's a much stronger word than the deplorable. She also said that we were irredeemable. The Lord himself doesn't call people irredeemable, but she did. So are we going to submit to the God of this world? Remember Keith Green, some of us that are old enough, and that one album he had called No Compromise, where the cover of the album was one man standing there when everybody else was bowing down to this tyrant on a horse, and a few of the people nearby him were looking up with fear in their eyes, as though he should also be bowing down? No mas. So what are we called to do? We're called to live peaceably as much with lies within us at every given time and point in history when we are alive, to represent the coming King as soterions, intruders into the kingdom of darkness. Why do you suppose that it says that the feet of him who brings the good news is beautiful? You ever thought about that? Because if you're lying on the battlefield in pitch black with tracer bullets going all over the place and incoming rounds, and here comes a guy that these rounds are bouncing off of, and you're laying half dead on the ground, what is the first thing you're going to see? And you're going to know instinctively, intuitively, and he's going to lean over and he's going to say, "I've come to save you," and pick you up and carry you off the battlefield. That's why his feet are beautiful, because he's come to save you. And we recognize that. This is a little different forum than I've ever been in before. I'm actually speaking my first language. I became a Christian and Spirit-filled believer in November of 1975 during the Jesus movement in California. Someone earlier asked me where I was from, and I like to tease people because actually that's quite a good advantage when you're in intelligence, if people can't tell where you're from. especially when you're in a foreign country and they don't think you're from America. They just don't know where you're from. I'm born in Ventura County. So I was going to say that this is my first language. My second language is the language of science. I went to the University of California at Davis as an entomology student. And that's where Francesca and I met 42 years ago. And then I went to the University of California at Riverside for graduate work in entomology. And I traveled all over the world as a specialist in agricultural entomology. I was a biological control expert, which some of you know a little bit about agriculture and science, know that that branch of entomology started here in California. We were the forerunners of a field of science, using bugs to eat bugs. I also studied economics of agricultural production, and I traveled all over the world, especially focused on Middle Eastern countries. And since I liked theology and languages, when I was there, I would study the language. And I started studying Quranic Arabic. I figured, by the Lord's leading, that if you're going to be living among the people, you need to understand what they believe and what they're saying when they talk to you. And he also said, I want you to be balanced, because my first calling and love was to the nation of Israel. But about 15, 20 years in, he showed me, I want you also to start understanding Islam, because I want to bring them to me too. And I want you to be balanced. I don't want you to be like a bird flying around in semicircles because one wing is weaker than the other. I want you to be strong and balanced. So I did it. And I started studying the language, and I started studying Quranic Arabic. It had no quote-unquote market value. Until 9/11. And all of a sudden, what I was in the visible world and what I was in the invisible switched. And overnight, I transformed into a different person. The Lord sat me up 2 weeks after 9/11, and he said, now's the time. Prepare yourself. Start getting ready. And I told my sister, who's standing in the back in Ojai, while my mother was sick with cancer and gradually passing away, that the Lord showed me I was going to become an intelligence officer. And this is before it all happened. Is that right, Diana? Mm-hmm. And so I did. I sat up and I began to prepare, getting organized. Whatever it was, I started organizing it. Time goes on, and I come into the Department of Homeland Security. Initially as a plant protection and quarantine officer, that is a non-armed law enforcement officer. But I started doing intelligence analysis of current events, and I would send them up the chain of command, and nobody had a clue what I was talking about. But that's a problem when you're working in the agency that was founded to protect our country from threat of terrorism. But in those early days, and starting in March of 2003, are what I call the halcyon days. The first 2-3 years of the founding of the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, was my agency. We were actually allowed to do the job that we had been, or taken our oath to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic. By the way, how many people here have taken that oath? Law enforcement or military? Well, don't feel left out if you haven't, because you can also, and I don't mean to literally do it right now, but in your heart and mind as you go along in the next few hours and days, take the same oath as a citizen of this country, as a representative of the coming King, that you will help protect your country from threat, both foreign and domestic. And you can define the threat in whatever arena the Lord calls you into. It happened to be with me that he called me into the arena of countering terrorism, of the strategy and tactics of the global Islamic movement based on Quranic Arabic. So I can tell you exactly what's going on in the world today, not based on a political narrative, but exactly from what the Quran itself says. And when I used to interview terrorists, Their first mistake was thinking that I was just an ordinary guy, because I am, but I have a supernatural gift, disguised, as it says, in earthen vessels. And I called it coffee cup counterterrorism. When you're on a long flight from somewhere, 10, 12-hour flight, how do you feel when you get off the flight? You know, pretty bad, right? So they come in my office, they sit down across the desk from me, and I give them a cup of coffee. Here, have a cup of coffee. That's a very polite thing to do in the Middle East. One of the most polite things you can do. But what happens when you drink coffee after you've been kind of drowsy? Start talking. I don't have to do anything. Just tell me something, and they start talking. Oh, and then what else happens when you drink coffee? A little too much, maybe. Off to the bathroom we go. Of course, they think psychologically that the interview is over because we're not sitting in the office, but I have my vase. So we walk together and I ask simple questions. How's your brother? How's your mother? Because anybody from that part of the world that may be here now knows that family is central to the identity of people from the Middle East. They know 3, 4, 5, 10 generations back on both sides of their mother and their father's family, every kind of profession that they did, and what kind of people they were. That's their identity. It's called the Ummah. Does anyone know what Ummah means? It means mother in Arabic. It is so synonymous, the community concept, with your own mother, that the community in Arabic is called Ummah. It's called the global Ummah, the global community. And so I ask them, how's your father, how's your mother? And they start talking. What town did you come from? Those are what we call the dots. Because there might be 500 different Mohammed Attas around the world, but there was only one that flew into the World Trade Center that happened to be from a particular small town in Saudi Arabia, as opposed to all the other Mohammed Attas that there might have been. That's called counterintelligence. So they have to go to the bathroom, and after they finish going to the bathroom, I'm standing there like I'm just disconnected, staring off into space, but I'm watching what they do, and that is how they wash their hands. Because a Salafi Muslim will wash their hands in a very precise, mechanical way. If you're not observant, you won't. So I know right there, while I'm just schlepping, leaning against the wall, whether this guy's a Salafi Muslim or not, just by the way he washes his hands. And then off back to the room we go, and then we become formal again, and I start asking him more questions. That's what we used to be able to do, but we can't anymore, because it's considered biased and discriminatory and Islamophobic. And if we do that, if we start asking questions about your masjid and your imam and what branch of Islam do you follow, we will be the ones we are the ones that suffer the consequences for it, for being a biased and discriminatory Islamophobe. And that, my friends, is why I was in a constantly adversarial relationship with my own government for more than 10 years. Because the Lord called me to study this subject, and by the fact that 9/11 happened, I found myself in exactly the center of a storm. I called it abiding in the vortex. It's actually been a while since I used that phrase, hasn't it? But my wife will recall that I used to describe it when people ask me, how are you doing? That's what was my common response. I'm abiding in the vortex. How can you survive inside the vortex of a tornado if the Lord doesn't put you there and keep you there? Because all you have to do is reach your arm out and it'll grind it off like a weed eater. You cannot stay in the fiery furnace or in the lion's den and survive it unless the Lord puts you there. But that's where He put me. And it was traumatizing. It was a tribulation. It was a trial. It was tears. But it was also triumph. And that's the part I'm sharing now, because I saw the hand of the Lord work many times in preposterously impossible situations that no one could survive them, not by some grand master plan, because I didn't have a grand master plan. All I did was abide from day to day to day and try to maintain my integrity by the grace of God. And that's the other thing that we need to talk about, is our own integrity. I call them secret indulgences. We will not survive spiritual warfare if we're giving ourselves permission for secret indulgences. I'll just talk to the guy's side of the fence. Secret indulgences, you know what I mean, don't you? We're not allowed. We're not authorized. When we take hits, swear in the face, it's without any sedative at all. You're going to take it right between the eyes, and you're not going to have any sedative to dull the pain. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for the feel of the nails when they go through your hands? Prepared for the threat that my own lawyer told me outside of the Ford building on July 26, 2013. Joe Schmitz, who is now Donald Trump's security advisor, taps his forehead standing out in front of the Ford building. We just finished talking with the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security, and I told him what a dangerous situation we're in. He blurted out, "We need to protect you, and we need to protect this information." And then he blurted it out again. And he did. I have to give him credit. It's the strangest paradox. He was corrupt. He was investigated and lost his position as Inspector General for preparing draft reports, inspection reports on my own agency and giving them to leadership and allowing them to edit them before he submitted them as a final report. Kind of a lot like what's been going on lately, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, Joe Schmitz taps his forehead, looks right at me and says, "The things you have in your head, the things you know, people will kill you for." And he wasn't talking about Yemen, jihadis from Yemen. He was talking about people within a square mile where we were standing, right in view of the Rayburn building, which is one of the House office buildings, and across from there is the state capitol. That's a surreal moment, friends. So those are the kinds of things that I went through. Before it was over, my own agency stripped me of my gun, which anybody in law enforcement knows is like being stripped naked in public. And they cut off access to all the systems that I've been using the whole course of my career. They revoked my secret clearance and then had the audacity to say that it wasn't an adverse action, like I could do anything without it. And then they sequestered me in a room for 11 months while I waited for the results of 3 simultaneous investigations. One through the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General, the other one from Internal Affairs of Customs and Border Protection, and the other one from the Department of Justice, Office of Integrity, who convened a grand jury to find criminal charges to indict me on. Do you think that I would have survived that if I didn't have integrity? And I mean God granted integrity? No, there's no way I could have survived it. And why was it so important for them to do that? The answer to what they're trying to do, the goals and the purpose of our adversary in the earthly sense, the progressive leftists and the global Islamic movement, ironically enough, is embedded right in the Declaration of Independence. It is that they are seeking to alter or abolish this current form of government. It was not written for a malevolent purpose. It was written for a benign instruction for us to use a checks and balances form of government to solve the challenges that we face, because we don't have a plan B. If we can't find the wherewithal to work out the challenges that face us as a country, we don't have a backup system. The only backup system is chaos and anarchy, a perfect environment for the progressive leftists and the global Islamic movement. Now you can see why they're seeking so hard to destabilize the foundations of the country that we're living on. Because from their worldview, to alter or abolish a form of government that they consider to be discriminatory, biased, and oppressive, and phobic is a good and noble thing. But they're not burdened with the moral crisis of telling the truth. For them, that's irrelevant. That's a tactic, and they're all about the strategy. So they can lie and deceive and censor and alter and stomp on the Constitution or civil law without a second thought, because in their mind, the noble goal is to alter or abolish this current form of government. And they feel, I guess you could say, though it's hard to believe it, that they're doing a good thing. How long has a progressive leftist movement been in existence, at least in the terms of the way we define it? I'm sure he knows. Since 1917. How long is that? 100 years. How long has the Islamic global movement been in existence? 1,400 years. Well, that's 14 times longer than the progressive leftist, so who has the actual tactical advantage in this thing? Who is actually using who? Islam is using the progressive left to accomplish their strategic purpose. And what is that? What is the goal, the strategy of the global Islamic movement? Somebody said it. Sharia law. That's too simple. No, it isn't simple at all. What is your goal tonight, your strategy when we're finished here? What will all of us, all of you, what will your goal be when we're finished tonight, except for the people that actually live here? What will your goal be? Easy. Go home. 2 words. Just go home. Go, E.T., go home. I think he was here too, wasn't he? But anyways, the point is that what's complicated about it is the tactics. How will you do it? Will you hitchhike? Will you skateboard, roller skate, motor scooter, car? Well, how will you do it? And if we were all here for a month straight, everyone's sitting in exactly the same seat where they are right now, and the school bell rung, and we all went outside at exactly the same time, and everybody parked exactly where they are right now, we still wouldn't get home at exactly the same time any of those months, days in the month. Why? Because of all the intervening circumstances that you can't foresee along the way that force you to alter your tactical approach to achieve your strategic goal, which never changes. Must go home. Right? That's the difference between strategy and tactics. The global Islamic movement, every single group that exists today are what I call pro-Sharia, pro-Jihad, Salafi, which by the way does not mean radical, it means original, to go back to the original Salafi, are motivated by one simple strategic goal: implementation of Sharia law. What is complex about it, kaleidoscopic if you will, or scopic if you will, is the tactics. How do you go about it? There's a whole spectrum of tactics that are available according to the Quran. All the way from friendly persuasion, called dawah, to intimidation, to coercion, to outright physical warfare. There's a whole spectrum. Different groups specialize in different, it's like colors of the rainbow. You take a prism, you split this white light on the wall here, and you will see the colors of the spectrum, won't you? I like blue. Well, I like red. No, I like green. Well, take your pick. But oddly, it all comes out of the same color light, doesn't it? The spectrum is embedded in this white light that we see right now. And if we put a prism or a CD and went like this, you'd be able to see those colors flashing off the face of the CD. Is the color coming from the CD? No, it's coming from the light. It's just compressed together, and we don't realize it unless we have a special tool to see it. That's called counterterrorism, counterintelligence. Having the special ability to see it, to use the tools, to see what's right in front of you. May I borrow your water? Well, I have one. Here's another allegory I always use. This is a simple water bottle, right? There are 3 elements in this water bottle, things in this water bottle. And I'll give you a clue. One of them is the water. So what are the other 2? Air. Somebody said air. So now we're down to 2 out of 3. This is a crack counterintelligence team. I can tell we're going to make a lot of big cases. So what is the third thing that is distinct from the water and the air, distinct from the water and the air, and is not the bottle either. Nope, 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 nope. Somebody said it. You get the gold star. It's light. Okay, well that's really obvious, isn't it? Yes, it's obvious once you see it. It's also obvious that the light coming out of these light bulbs actually has 6 or 7 colors embedded in it. But unless you know how to split that light, you won't ever see it. It's right in front of you. I guarantee you now, and cops like donuts, right? So I'll bet you coffee and a donut that you're never going to look at an ordinary water bottle quite the same again, because you're going to see this simple illustration staring you in the face every time you have a bottle of water. And that's my purpose. That's why I travel around the country. Here's the water bottle, everybody. That's what's in it. And once you see it, you will not unsee it, will you? So what is the basis for the election? What are we supposed to be discerning? What is the right way to respond to the challenges that we face? For me, it's really simple. Since we are a constitutional republic, then let us evaluate the candidates based on the Constitution. Meaning, who is more likely of the 2 primary candidates that we have to uphold the principles of the Constitution and or the Declaration of Independence?
Trump.
If it's so obvious, then what are we arguing about? If it was so obvious before, why didn't we vote for Romney and carry the election? It's not so obvious, is it? It's based, we're not selecting a church board, as we sadly found out today, are we? Nonetheless, with the choices that we have, if we're going to remain engaged, involved in this government of, for, and by the people, then we have basically, as she said, 2 choices. Who is more likely to stand and uphold the principles of the Constitution? I am perfectly willing, since I was investigated by this administration 8 times, I have seen it up close and personal. I know full well what they're capable of doing. So for me, the choice is pretty simple. I will choose the uncertainty of the Republican side over the certainty of the Democratic side, because they state plainly what they intend to do, and they will, to their utmost, seek to alter or abolish this current form of government. And if you stand in their way, you will become the violent extremists. Is that true? You bet. Because this ideology is really the same, and that's what you meant by 6,000 years. It's the everlasting hatred for the principles and truths of God, the covenants of God, the promises that He made, that if we would abide in Him, He would abide in us, and never leave us or forsake us. How are we doing on time? Are we about done with time? Okay. I didn't tell you hardly anything about the book or all the amazing stories and people. I would like to spend a couple minutes, just really 1 or 2, and to tell you about the San Bernardino case. That was my case. I worked on it at the National Targeting Center. That's the Secret Squirrel headquarters up in Washington. I put together analysis in a case with 1,600 different individuals in a database that generated 1,200 law enforcement actions in 9 months, plus a commendation letter, which is actually in the book, because I know people psychologically, and I don't blame you or anyone, have a very difficult time believing that what I'm telling you is actually true and really happened. So I put the letters in the book to remedy the problem, to address it, so that you can go back and look and see that if anything, I understate my case, as I don't overstate. So I'm working on the Tablighi Jamaat case. The Department of Homeland Security, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Branch, and the Department of State with 7 lawyers come to the National Targeting Center, sit down at a big table, and say they have concerns about our focus on this group called Tablighi Jamaat, that we might be violating the civil rights and civil liberties of these foreign nationals simply because they're affiliated with this Muslim group called Tablighi Jamaat, which is 75 to 125 million members globally, and they're called the Army of Darkness in the rest of the world. They shut the case down. We fast forward to San Bernardino, Dar Uloom al-Islamiyah, San Bernardino, and lo and behold, Syed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik, he is a Hafiz, he's memorized the Quran, are affiliated with the global Tablighi Jamaat movement. Therefore, my plausible claim is that we could have prevented it on at least two bases. So simply allowed to do our work, either Syed Farouk would have been put on the no-fly list and never traveled, or his pending fiancée, Tashfeen Malik, would have never been given a K-1 immigrant visa and never come here. And the third plausible way is that the FBI was already tracking him with Omar Mateen, who supplied the guns. That's where all those pipe bombs came from. And he's in prison now, meaning Omar Mateen, does anybody know why he's in prison right now? For multiple failed plots with Syed Farouk. Think about that one for a minute. How can they have known about multiple failed plots between Syed Farouk and Enrique Marquez unless they were tracking him? And they never intervened. So there's three plausible ways that we could have stopped it. And then even worse, another layer on top of that is that the Orlando shooting with Omar Mateen is part of the same network. So they shut this case down, and one thing leads to another, and here we are finding ourselves with an administration that continues to insist that there's no association between this religion of peace and what their actual stated purpose is. And so I'll sum it up, that is that the implementation of Sharia law, because by its own definition, Sharia opposes all forms of human government, which would include by default the U.S. Constitution. And that's what we're facing, folks. And again, the Constitution is saturated with biblical values. So if you don't want to approach this challenge from a political perspective, fine. Approach it from a biblical perspective. Give yourself a homework assignment and track through and find all the links to biblical principles that are embedded in the Constitution so that you can satisfy yourself theologically that you're in the Lord's will and attack it from that perspective. But don't use an excuse that you're not interested in politics. You know why? Because politics is interested in you. Okay? Let me finish. Different subject, one more minute. I'm going to quote from Abraham Lincoln to finish up. Second address to Congress in 1862. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulties, but we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew, and we must act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country, the last best hope on earth. Thank you, everyone.